voice of growth, mastering the mind and market.
I've worked in footwear and apparel, consumer packaged goods, and then most recently in tech. I started working pretty closely with our C-suite. We started to see that they could get through to the audiences that we cared most about far better than we could as a brand. What might I want to do if someday something entrepreneurial was on the table? It builds trust with your audience, and trust to me is paramount. To pre-pandemic to 2025, LinkedIn doubled in its user base globally.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's got like 1.2 billion users now. If you truly know your voice and you know those principles or values that you want to put forward and be associated with, then I think it's a lot easier to leverage AI as a friendly tool, but the core is still you.
So, Jess Jensen, you've been at the number of very important, very high level companies like Microsoft, Adidas, Qualcomm, Nestlé, and you were really embedded in these companies. Then you decided to make the jump into helping leaders stand out online to show up as their best selves. What was the impetus for that big jump?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on the show. Yeah, you're right. The career that I led up until now has been inside of these larger Fortune 500 corporations. Um, but the last 5-ish years of my chapter at Qualcomm, I started working pretty closely with our C-suite. So, our CEO, our president, a few other leaders of business lines. And it
Mhm.
was really coming from a place of the corporate side of the house, where I looked after digital marketing, social media influencer, all those things. We were recognizing that our reach and our ability to kind of get to our audience was waning, right? We were seeing numbers decline. We weren't quite sure why. We were experimenting with that. And at the same time, in parallel, this is around like 2016, 17,
Mhm.
we were also seeing a lot of other C-suite members, especially in the tech industry, but beyond, really begin to build platforms online, specifically in those days, Twitter and LinkedIn. So we had the thought that we should experiment a bit and see if we can encourage and support a few of our leaders to also do that. And so as I built that program, which again was very much a pilot kind of on the corner of my desk, um, we started to see that they could get through to the audiences that we cared most about um, far better than we could as a brand. And in hindsight, of course, it makes sense, right? People,
Yeah.
they want to connect with other people. And they're interested to understand kind of the behind the scenes, which often leaders bring. And a brand, of course, is going to just inherently be a little bit more polished, a little bit more PR oriented, sort of, the best of the best.
Yeah.
So that pilot grew to become a practice. We were able to staff it and fund it and all those things. And as the CEO over the course of a number of years, this was a slow burn,
Yeah.
um, began to understand that, his voice was meaningful and had weight in addition to whatever we could do from a broader corporate standpoint. It obviously encouraged the other leadership to do the same thing, right? They saw that he was doing it. They saw that there was some success and they wanted to be part of that
Mhm.
party. So as my career was kind of hitting that 20-year mark, in that corporate environment, it was always sort of bubbling and kind of germinating in the back of my mind, like, what might I want to do if someday something entrepreneurial was on the table?
Okay.
Do I want to end my career in a corporate environment and sort of keep going on this trajectory, or is there an opportunity to do something where I have a little bit more ability to shape and build?
Mhm.
And I realized that practice that I had now at this point created and nurtured and codified inside Qualcomm was the part of my job that I liked the most.
Mhm.
Um, I'll always be a digital marketer. I'll always love brand building. That's kind of my heritage, but the idea of working with leaders, individuals, especially those that really are thoughtful and want to leave a mark and think about their legacy. They sort of want to go a bit deeper, perhaps.
Okay.
That work was really soul filling for me and gratifying. And I thought, gosh, if I could build this inside, couldn't I build it outside too for myself?
Mm, I
So
see
that's
that.
what Copilot is today.
Interesting. So, what would you say and that's a story that a lot of, people that I speak with going from the corporate domain and then branching out, it's very, that's more common than the other way around, somebody working for a startup or their own thing for 20 years and then going into the corporate domain. What do you see as some of the roadblocks that we'll say, C-suite executives, whether it was in your experience under the corporate umbrella or now with running Copilot, what do you see as some things that prevent these executives from really showing up as their best version online? What's happening there?
Yeah, there's a number of reasons, and I've also been able to kind of replicate this research, if you wanna call it that, in the last year and a half that I've had my own company as I've been speaking to other people. So this is not certainly not unique to executives inside of the corporations that I worked in. So a couple things. One, there is a sense of what do I have to say that anybody would care about?
Mm,
And it might be surprising, at least it was to me, that somebody at that level, inside of that size of company with global reach would think that, but they
right.
do. Um, and as do solopreneurs that I talked to today. So it spans the gamut, sort of the if you wanna use the term imposter syndrome, although,
Yeah.
that's an overused, word these days, but it's this idea of why would anyone care what I have to say? Why am I unique or special? So that's one. 2, just not having a framework. Like, okay, let's just say I'm
Mhm.
interested. I'm curious. I'm digital curious. Um, how do I even start about organizing my thoughts? Like, am I writing it? Are you helping me write it? There's all kinds of visuals that need to like, all of the framing around the logistics and the operational model for it is a
Mhm.
big kind of black box for a lot of people, which is, again, totally makes sense, right? When you haven't done something before, it feels overwhelming to even
Yeah,
know how to build a frame or a blueprint.
I see that.
And then another one is time. I think this was especially a hurdle in the beginning, and over time we were able to overcome this concern. But we can imagine even as founders, as leaders of small businesses, let alone of a leader of a very very large company, time is your currency.
Mhm.
And so you have to constantly be making these trade-off decisions. Do I do this or do I do that? Is this the priority or is that? And we want to be thoughtful, obviously, about sort of the tyranny of the urgent, not just doing whatever, is on fire. We want to be
Yeah.
strategic when we can. So there was a degree in the beginning of me needing to kind of convince our leadership. I get it. I know how busy you are. I know you're on a plane 60% of the time.
Yeah, right.
But if you have a coach, if you have a partner, if we kind of fortify you with some support, and you'll allow us to get to know you at a little bit more of a personal level so we can actually help shape your voice, then together, perhaps, is it worth, 30, 60 minutes a week of your time, knowing that this again is incremental to whatever we can do on the corporate brand side. It's helping
Mhm.
this company grow in a way that only you can do.
Yeah, the idea of, if they don't know you, they can't flow you. It's something that Grant Cardone said, which I'm not sure if you're a fan or not, but I'm not necessarily a fan. But I do respect the fact that someone like that has taken, so much of his career in front of the stage, if you will, and it's been propelled. And then I have friends that are not on social media or not on even on LinkedIn, and these are like, I would say, very successful magnets here in the region, and they have no presence online.
Mhm.
And I sort of struggle with that. I'm like, "Dude, you have so much to say. You have so many experiences." And, I'm interviewing, the former CEO of Macy's here, in a couple weeks, and his online presence is mainly through his other efforts, donations and philanthropy and all that. How do you find these executives to work with? What is the story? Do they come to you? Do you find them? Is it a mutual thing? Is it recommendations? How does that all happen?
Yeah. I mean, back when I was inside of a corporate environment, I again, back in 16, 17, those earlier, quote, earlier days, um, I was definitely pitching, right? I had my normal job, right? I had my practice and my remit of digital marketing, social, all that. But and this is also to your earlier question of like, why jump off that train and go do something entrepreneurial? I saw a pattern in myself where I realized that I was a builder,
Mhm,
and I would often be able to look at patterns and see where there was an opportunity. And I wouldn't just see it, to be honest, I would actually think about it and pencil out what it could look like, and then I would begin to pitch it internally.
mhm,
And, in the beginning, you have no budget, you have no team, you're just literally doing it as like an extracurricular project. And then once you can get a little bit of momentum, build a little bit of a flywheel, and then you get some support, you can obviously go to bat for
mhm,
some help. So inside, it was me coming to these executives and saying, "Hey, I have this idea. I understand these platforms and I understand content creation and I know sort of how this universe works. I know a little bit about you, but I bet
mhm,
if you'll open the door a bit and let me get to know you just a little bit more and we can build some trust and you'll give me a little bit of your time, I think you might be surprised, A, how helpful this could be for the company, both internally and externally, right? That was one of the things that I used in the very beginning, which is it's kind of an overlooked benefit of building a platform. People tend to think about it all as the external, the
mhm.
public,
Yeah,
um, customers, clients, partners, the street, investors. But meanwhile, some of the first people that pay attention when you begin are your
the
employees.
employees. Yeah.
Yes, and so I would talk about that with them and say, even if for no other reason, even if you think you have nothing to say and no one's gonna care about what you put out there, I'm gonna bet a good chunk of our employees will watch, and they will gravitate to you.
Right.
They will they will follow you first. So um, all that to be said, there were sort of angles I would use back then to try to convince them that this was a good use of their time and it was helpful and accretive to the business and to the overall sort of employee morale and even perception, right?
Mhm.
Financial perception of the future of the company. Now, again, we're in a different era too. We're post-pandemic, right? It's 26. I think there's much more, and LinkedIn has changed quite a bit, and X,
Right.
Twitter has changed as well.
Right.
So not only have we changed, right, coming out of what we all went through a few years back, um, the digital platforms have changed. Now we have AI in the mix. So there's, I think, a much more broad understanding and acknowledgement by leaders, founders that, yeah, I probably should be doing something online.
Mhm.
That would probably be wise of me. And then you kind of move in quicker to the conversation of the how and the
Right.
why you're valuable.
I see that. So that actually spurred 2 questions from what you just said. I'll ask one, and I'll let you kinda answer, then I'll ask the other because 'cause they're kinda separate. How do you deal with the struggle that they might have, the tension, if you will, between the strategic message that they're trying to really put forth and vulnerability? So I talk a lot about vulnerability on my podcast in general, how I believe it's really important. But I know a lot of people in that sort of level of executives, they don't understand the power of it maybe, and they sort of struggle with being open. So how do you kind of reconcile that?
Mhm. It's funny, vulnerability, we should give credit to Brené Brown for bringing that to the forefront of our zeitgeist, but I vulnerability has become such a word, right? Now it's almost like a fast follow to authenticity. It has such richness to it, and it's so important, and it's also now being used so frequently.
Mhm.
So I'm with you on its importance, and I'm also always, like, scratching my head for how do I say that in, like, slightly different ways
Right.
to break through?
Yeah.
Um, One of the things that I talk about around vulnerability and authenticity, is that like the why, right? Why would you share personal stories? Again, why would anybody care? Why would you talk about challenges that you faced and maybe overcome, or maybe it caused you to pivot? Let's
Mhm.
just hear it. Um, the reason, two reasons. One is it builds trust with your audience, and trust to me is paramount.
Mhm.
Paramount. I know Edelman, a comms agency that's been doing what they call the Edelman Trust Barometer, a research study annually for years. So again, I'm certainly not the first person to bring this idea up that measuring and nurturing relationships, in as much that they build trust with the person and then cascades to the brand, is of huge value. So when you're vulnerable, you are building trust because you're showing that you're imperfect. You're showing that you're human. You're showing that you've been through things. Because guess what? We all have. Like,
Right.
like who are you fooling? When
Levels.
The other reason, which is a little bit more, strategic, again, given the platforms and what I know from working in them for so long, um, hu humans inherently are drawn to stories.
Mhm.
And again, storytelling is another one of those words that's become very buzzy, so I'm reluctant to use that too often, but the the reality is that, and we all feel it. I don't know about you, like, I remember feeling this even back in high school, in my early 20s, going to parties and there being people who could command an audience
Yeah.
because they were good storytellers, right? Have
I
you ever
know exactly
experienced?
what you mean. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it almost didn't even matter what they were talking about, and they didn't even have to be the most attractive person in the room, but they had a magnetism about them because they could tell a story.
Yeah.
And so that's another reason that, I encourage my clients now to, again, let me inside, let me get to know you. Doesn't mean that we have to share everything publicly. We're still gonna, of course, filter to some degree,
Right.
but the more, fodder and the more sort of, like, depth I have about your origin story and the challenges you overcome, maybe things that you don't talk about a lot publicly, that helps me help them shape their voice and, use those stories to be relatable, to draw people to them and tie it back to their business, right? They're tying those personal stories into things that are relevant today in their work.
I see that all the time, Jess, being in this seat, interviewing people. I have to basically be a guide, a storyteller guide, and I some of these people I know personally, some of them I just met. Literally, the president of a big mine came into my studio here, and I just met him. So I've gotta really figure out very quickly how to get them comfortable and get them open, and, sometimes you can even almost measure. I wish there was, like, a way to measure that trust level as it's actually happening, because sometimes there's this sort of, like, posturing that happens, and then through the course of a 45-minute podcast, by the end of it, they're like, way more open, way more,
Yep.
talkative. They're going into details about their personal life, which I didn't really necessarily ask for.
Yep.
Anyway, it's brilliant. The other part of my question had to do with the social platforms. Are you primarily on LinkedIn, or are you primarily doing other things?
Well, the platform that I work the most with my clients today is LinkedIn. And that's for a few reasons. the my background spans all of the social platforms, so all the usual suspects, right? Back in the day, Facebook, Instagram, again, X/Twitter used to be a bigger player in the mix,
Yeah.
especially for our executives. It's changed quite a bit with the new leadership
Right.
that's taken hold. So, and then there's some newer players, right? Like Blue Sky. I mean, there's always sort of TikTok, of course. So I'm comfortable in all of them, but to be honest, because LinkedIn, I'll just share a few stats, has changed so much since 2020. So if you look at the numbers from 2019, so pre-pandemic to 2025, LinkedIn doubled in its user base
Wow.
globally. Yeah. So it's got like 1.2 billion users now, up from like
Crazy.
448. So just the sheer volume of people that are active is way bigger than it was 5 years ago. Two, it's the number one writing platform. If you just look at all of
Mhm.
the places people can, for example, blog, like Substack, I know is rising up as a really interesting player, which is great. So there's lots of players out there, but LinkedIn is where people go to write longer form content and use it
Mhm.
kind of like microblogging, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's historically been, we used to describe it back in the day as like a lot of the other platforms were much more sort of lean forward, quick, 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 hit, hit, hit. LinkedIn has always been more of a lean back. I'm going to like take a hot second with my cup of
Yeah.
coffee and maybe read a little bit.
Right.
So it's always given us permission to go longer. And now with sort of the increase in user base and the longer form writing, it's even more that way. And then the last one is, and this has also been the case for a long time for LinkedIn, it's always had this advantage. When you think about people who are doing business and
Mhm.
often want to attract future clients and customers, um, it is a subset of people that would even be in a position to purchase their product or
Right.
service. So LinkedIn's got over half of its users have over a six-figure annual income, so over 100K in household income. No other social property can boast that.
Yeah, I can
So
see
you
that.
just have a little bit more of you have a subset of an audience there that often is a little bit more qualified or just maybe more targeted for a lot of the people that I work with in terms of who they want to attract and influence.
Yeah, I really, I like LinkedIn a lot. I've been on it for a long time, and, when you compare it to the other social platforms, it's definitely different. It has a different vibe. Sometimes you see things sort of bleeding in from the other ones, and I tend to ignore when that happens. People getting political or posting vacation pictures, it happens. But I also know that a huge swath of the user base, and you probably know the numbers, uses it more like just a digital resume.
Mhm.
They don't go beyond that. So how would you recommend a rising star, if you will? Maybe they're a mid-level to they're kind of approaching the C-suite. They're not quite there yet. How would you recommend that they take advantage of what LinkedIn really is to grow their brand, to grow their personal brand and their career in general?
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect question, and you hit it on the head. There are still, even today, a lot of people that use it as a digital resume, which is what it once was, right? I
Right.
mean, 10
Yeah.
years ago, it absolutely was that. I remember there being a time when we were like, "Well, are we gonna put all this online? Like, are we sure even gonna put that?"
Yeah.
Like, that even felt vulnerable. Um, and it stayed that way for a long time. And so I get it. I get that that's the mindset. It's kind of like it's like if you were friends with somebody when you were in your 20s, and then maybe you both move into different cities and you leave your hometown and you sort of come back a decade
Mhm.
later. And you have this level of familiarity. You sort of feel like you know what that person's about. But meanwhile, you've both changed and
Yeah.
grown. And it's like, yes, you have a history, of course, and there's a level of comfort there, but you also want to be open to what's new about that person.
Of
And
course.
hopefully they're open to what's changed with you too. So LinkedIn has really evolved, right? LinkedIn, yes, it still has that experience section. Of course, you want to get that dialed and make sure that's accurate. And I always say, and I'm not a career counselor, so I won't pretend to advise on this piece, but that it doesn't need to be every single thing you'd have in your resume. It's just meant to be your highlight reel, right?
Right.
And if
Yeah.
that's enough to attract an executive recruiter or what have you, they're going to ask for your physical resume anyway, and you can go into all the details there.
Yeah.
So I don't spend very much time on the experience section because again, my role isn't to help you get a job necessarily. Um, Although I have had folks that kind of come to me that are in that role,
Mhm.
but it's more to how do you build a professional brand for yourself? LinkedIn is one great tool. There are, of course, other tools like this, guesting on podcasts, writing a blog on Substack, um, Instagram, depending on what industry or vertical you're in. Um, but I talk a lot about things like your headline, right underneath your name, right? That two-sentence little box there that's
Mhm.
so key to nail.
Mhm.
And I looked at yours before we went on, and you've done a great job, but not everyone understands what to do with that space.
Yeah, I was just actually gonna ask you to give your thoughts on mine.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing honestly, Manny, that I would add to your headline is, you do a great job of talking about, your role and sort of your social proof and how you're differentiated. I'd love to see just a little bit about something that you believe, like a
Interesting.
philosophical belief
Yeah,
in
that's
your
great.
approach. 'Cause that starts to soften you, right? It gives us a little peek into who you are and how you think.
I can see that. Yeah, I have friends that I've met through LinkedIn, which is interesting. I can't really say the same for the other platforms. I mean, maybe here and there, but, a friend of mine, Brandon Wilson, he's basically a software guy. He reached out on LinkedIn. I don't know why I engaged with him. I just did, and now we're friends. He comes down to see me and, we're maybe do some business together. But it really has created for me at least a way to understand somebody's background. One of my gifts, if you will, is the ability to understand somebody's motivations and kind of get behind the scenes a bit. Not for a Machiavellian reason, but I really want to understand, is there a fit here? Can we work together? And I see that a lot of people are, like you say, they're listing all these things on their LinkedIn, and that's okay, that's overwhelming. And so I like the idea of being able to boil it down to the headline. How do you see LinkedIn changing and your role changing with AI?
Yeah, I know this
On both
comes up.
sides, right? On both you using AI and then, of course, everybody else using AI and these bots and whatnot.
Yep. Yeah, I feel like this comes up almost every day. So it's a great question. Obviously, it's affecting all of our lives. There's so much. I can't like I almost am overwhelmed with how much we're all consuming, and I'm sure from different sources and at different volumes. But if I apply it just to the work I do and the way that I would advise my clients, AI is a great tool. In fact, one of the analogies I used just last weekend at a dinner party with some friends was in many ways, at least for now, and this could be different by summer of 26 at the pace that it's changing. AI for me is like a junior employee.
Mhm.
The better that I train it, the better that I prompt it, the more fodder I give it, the better product it produces for me. And I'm not really gonna let it just sort of run, at least not yet. Again, I
Yeah.
know agents are being built, agentic AI is a thing.
Yep.
There's probably going to be in the next year such evolution that by the time someone listens to this, it may be already out of date. But as of February 26, I love using it as a partner, as a sparring partner,
Mhm.
as a editor. It helps me do research before I get on calls. So, for example, the 2 places I look you up or anyone that I would do a podcast with is on either Chat or Gemini, and then LinkedIn. And
Yeah.
between those 2 bits of research, I in a half an hour feel like I've got a decent sense of, how I might wanna approach a conversation with someone I don't know.
Yeah.
So, it's a great research tool, right? It shortens the cycles of things. I'm able to pull together, a scope of work in 45 minutes, even with all of my fine tuning, all of my language edits that I always do to make it me, instead of like 3 hours.
Right.
So I love it for all those reasons. What I'm not loving, and I just read a lovely Substack article about this on Monday. It almost brought me to tears, actually.
Really?
Um, yeah, it was about this idea that we, we r as writers and it's funny, I never would have called myself a writer a few years ago, but
Mhm.
I have always written in my work, edited, given feedback on the written word. And now, I probably write more than ever before, whether it's for my own platform building, whether it's to partner with clients, and I like it. I enjoy it. I think I'm decent at it.
Mhm.
But what's happening with AI is I think a lot of folks that maybe don't get the joy or feel sort of that soul filling aspect of writing, it's a very easy out,
Very
right?
much. Yeah.
And so what we're seeing is, the term I've heard people use, so I'll borrow it, is it's sort of the cacophony of mediocrity.
Yeah. For
Right.
sure.
So it's just the plane is being flooded. And we're seeing that on LinkedIn, we're seeing it in a lot of other places too, I see it in Instagram, like, I can almost detect now, I can see the patterning, I can the M dashes, like,
Yeah.
I can see AI was a heavy hand, and again, I use it all the time, every day I use it, so all good, but it's the way in which you use it, how much of your voice is still coming through, um, and so for me, I'm hopeful that as good as it gets and as ubiquitous as it's becoming, that people still wanna hear from other people, and there's, an empathy and a sort of nuance that only humans have when we communicate,
Mhm.
a reading of the room, if you will, that I hope AI can never replace.
Yeah, I hope so too. I have 2 children, they're almost grown. I have a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old, and I've done my very best to arm them with both an understanding and, a respect for technology, but also very humanistic features, which are becoming less and less prominent in, like, the circles I run. Like, my kids have been ordering their own food since they were 3 and 5, and people would say, "Why are you having your three-year-old order their own meal?" Because for me, it was important that they learned how to use their voice.
Yeah.
And, fast forward now, now their confidence is better and higher and more out there. Their buddies come in the door, and I can see a difference where maybe they were raised on an iPad, and my boys didn't have that until, much, much later. Now, I kind of agree with you. For me, AI is a great tool. I use it as well. I use it to do some editing. But I've been trying to be very careful to curate my own voice as well. And I sent, something to a buddy of mine. I'm working on this sales article I'm writing, and I wrote an article, and then I had, like, the second half of it, I was, like, running out of time, and I, like, just had AI kinda, like, frame it up, and then I sent it to him, and he actually sent it back to me, and he said, WTH, dude," and he, like, made it all red, exactly almost exactly all the things that I had done in ChatGPT, so
Yeah.
totally understand that.
Yeah.
Um, go
Yeah,
ahead.
there's a lot there that, again, is, happening so fast, and it will continue to change. But, I'll just add one last thing to this part of the conversation. I think the work that I do with executives and founders starts with, um, deeply interviewing them and really asking them some more personal and sort of thought-provoking questions. Um, I believe that if you're not self-reflective, you're frankly not going to be a good content creator, and then
Mhm.
ultimately your professional brand is just, it's a hack, it's not really you. I think that transcends into this conversation about AI. If you truly know your voice and you know those principles or values that you wanna put forward and be
Mhm.
associated with, then I think it's a lot easier to leverage AI as a friendly tool, but the core is still you.
Yeah. Jess, who do you look up to?
I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Mhm.
As you can imagine, being a guest, I'm also very much a listener. And I read quite a bit too. I would say, on the podcasting front, I love the podcast Diary of a CEO.
That's my favorite one.
Oh, that's great. I was
Yeah.
just listening to an episode this morning, actually.
Which one did you listen to?
It was the one with, he wrote the book, Smart Couples Finish Rich.
Mm, nice.
Um, so which has been around for like 20 years. So he's been doing this for a long time.
Right.
But it was so it was a financial oriented, but also life, as all of his podcasts go pretty
Yeah,
long, so they touch lots of subjects.
yeah.
I love learning. I loved he did one with a woman named Vanessa Van Edwards, who's
I
a
love
comedian.
Vanessa. Yeah.
Okay, okay, great. Yeah, I do too. I think she's out of Austin. And again, it was all about communication, not just the kind that I do, but also like when you're on stage and your body language and how much we communicate outside of the content, the words. So, I love learning about sort of things that touch on obviously marketing, business, economics. I like a guy named Scott Galloway.
Mhm. I listen to Scott as well.
Prof G, yeah, which again touches on AI, digital marketing, economics. I like all those things. So those are kind of podcasters maybe I look up to and just either learn from or recognize I can pull best practices
Yeah.
out of. On the social side, talk about humanity and being a whole person. I really admire Sarah Blakely. So she was the
Mhm.
founder of Spanx.
Yeah, I got to meet her one time.
Oh, you did? That's
Yes.
how was she in person?
She was is just the same as she is in, online, just friendly, very, very to the point, but with kind of a soft edge. I mean, I really liked her presence.
Yeah, that's so good to hear. I love how she is both on Instagram. She's heavy on Instagram, a little lighter on LinkedIn, but she's in both places. Um, and another one that's a little bit more polished, but I do feel like she does a nice job of marrying the professional with the personal is the chief marketing officer for Autodesk, who's named Dara Tressiter.
Never heard of her.
Yeah, Dara also she was the CMO at Peloton before this, and then Apple before not a CMO, but she was at Apple prior to that. So she's, again, kind of a marketing leader, but
Hmm,
she does a nice job, again, of marrying Autodesk, important moments and, supporting her team, but also sharing stuff about her family and about her travels and her education, just her. So
yeah.
and then Frank Cooper is another one. Frank Cooper is the CMO of, Visa.
Interesting.
But also again has a pretty storied background. He was in the financial services, investment space, and he was at Pepsi and then at Def Jam Records. So, like,
Interesting.
touched a lot of and that's my background too, right? Like,
Yeah.
I've worked in footwear and apparel, consumer packaged goods, and then most recently in tech. So, I kind of relate to people I think that have this sort of variety in their
Uh-huh.
background. I find that you pull things from other industries or other competitive sets into your current work that's
Mhm.
kind of fresh and comes from a different angle, and I like that.
Yeah, I'm very much the same way. I think there's a lot of power in bringing different markets together. I've done it so many times where something I learned in one market, like I was in medical device in that realm. So I learned something from that realm that I brought to a company that I had started in the ag space, completely different. But I connected the two and I was able to make some interesting things happen. So as we round out the rest of the podcast here, I've got one final question for you. And I like to go a little deep every once in a while. This one is, Jess, what do you want to be remembered for?
Mhm. Yeah. What do you want your legacy to be? Um, I, and this is it's hard to not think about your own kids when this question is
Of
posed.
course.
I'll speak in terms of what I would want them to remember me for. I want them to know that they are wildly capable. And, I feel fortunate. I grew up, uh, I don't know how, but I ended up sort of with parents that maybe didn't expose me to some of the quote limitations that there could be,
Hmm.
um, based on, socioeconomic status, based on gender, but we all have different things that we think about. And I don't think I was really in my 20s until I started to kind of recognize like, oh, there's these sort of walls that I'm supposed to stay within, this sandbox I'm supposed to play within. And I feel so fortunate that I was naive to that for so long.
Nice. Yeah.
And so I think the reason I've had maybe the good fortune of the career that I've had, I'm now building, my first business. I was never told that that's not for you. And I really want them to remember that part of me and to also embody that in their careers and in their lives, that they are wildly capable and there's no reason they can't be anything that they set their mind to.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. There's a lot of power in that freedom.
Mm.
Thank you so much, Jess, for spending this time with us and sharing your thoughts. It actually got me reflecting. I made some notes here about my own, not only my own presence and brand as it pertains to LinkedIn, but also some of these folks I mentioned that don't have a presence that might need a little nudge, and so I might be connecting you with them at some point in time.
Can I leave you with just maybe an offer for them to consider?
Please, please do.
Because it's good timing. So, I'm assuming we'll release this prior. I'm doing something new. So starting April 15th, I've got a small cohort of 8 people that, I'm going to run a 6-week, program with.
Great.
And it's rooted in all of these LinkedIn audits, all of these conversations that I've been having with people over the last 6 months. I've seen a lot of patterns, and my thought was, how can I kind of codify that in a small group setting? Because a lot of us are dealing with the same hurdles. So
Sure.
it's called Altitude. I had to, I mean, the marketer in me, I
Of
had to
course, you're a
brand
marketer.
it. So it's LinkedIn branding for small business owners on the rise. And it's, again, safe space, small group. We can learn from one another, but a little more efficient than having to go through something with just the 2 of us. We can do it in
Mhm.
this cohort. So if anyone's interested in finding out more, you can email me at Jess Jensen at Copilot Communications, and I will put you on the list to let you know when registration opens before I announce it publicly.
Nice. That's a great offer. I'll definitely make the connection to a few of these folks, and, yeah, I think that, especially as so much changing with I think it's more important now than ever to stand out and to really, stake your claim on, "This is who I am," going back to the vulnerability and going back to authenticity, all these buzzwords, which I'm kinda glad they're buzzwords because it's at least exposing it to the world. So, yeah, thank you so much for that offer, Jess, and, looking forward to the next time we chat.
Yeah, thanks, Manny.
Okay, take care.